Captain Raylan stood before the viewports of the Elysium, her gaze fixated on the vast expanse of the stars. The ship glided through space, a tiny speck of human ingenuity drifting among the endless void. Aboard the ship, the crew moved with precision, preparing for the mission they had set out on. There were whispers, nervous glances exchanged behind closed doors, and reluctant compliance. But Raylan didn't mind. She had never been one to follow the expectations of others. There was something in her blood, a relentless desire to push past the boundaries of caution, to reach into the unknown. The Elysium was one of the most advanced ships in the human fleet, a marvel of technology crafted to explore the farthest reaches of the galaxy. She was a warship, designed for combat, but her purpose today was far from that. Today they were on a rescue mission, one that could either bring hope or lead to a dangerous confrontation with the unknown. A voice crackled through the intercom, pulling Raylan from her thoughts. "Captain, we've reached the coordinates," said Commander Jax, the first officer. His voice was steady, but Raylan could hear the undercurrent of uncertainty. "We're approaching the system. The readings are odd." Raylan's pulse quickened, but she didn't let her nervousness show. "Understood. Bring us into orbit around Valin 6. Initiate a full scan of the planet." As the ship adjusted its trajectory, Raylan looked to the crew gathered around the command console. Her eyes met Dr. Ophelia Zane's, a brilliant scientist and the head researcher on the team. Zane's expression was one of skepticism, her brow furrowed as she stared at the holographic map that had been generated. She wasn't entirely convinced that the mission was worth the risk. "Captain," Dr. Zane began, her voice laced with doubt, "we're talking about an entire species that has been lost for centuries. Forgotten by every civilization that came across their path. The Solarii were abandoned for a reason. No one even knows if they're still alive. This could all be a wild goose chase." Raylan didn't flinch. "The Solarii are real. I've seen the records. They're not gone, they're just lost. We can't turn our backs on them now, not when we know there's a chance to help." She had heard the stories of the Solarii, their rise and fall. Once they were a thriving, advanced species, living in harmony with the cosmos, their civilization stretching across entire star systems. But their prosperity was shattered by an unforeseen catastrophe. Some cosmic anomaly had ruptured the fabric of their existence. The Solarii were not like other species. They were beings of light and energy, tied to a dimension of pure consciousness. When their homeworld, Valin 6, was torn apart by the event, their race became fractured, their very being scattered across the stars. The Galactic Council had written them off as a lost cause, a race that could never recover from such a calamity. Most believed the Solarii had ceased to exist in any meaningful form, their energy patterns fading into the black void. But Captain Raylan had refused to believe that. She had spent years studying ancient archives, speaking with the few surviving witnesses who had encountered the Solarii. And now she was convinced the Solarii weren't gone. They were waiting for someone brave enough to rescue them. As the Elysium entered Valin 6's orbit, the planet came into view. It was a sad, desolate sight. Once a lush world teeming with life, it now appeared barren and hollow. A vast wasteland stretched across its surface, where there had once been vibrant cities and sprawling forests. There were faint signs of movement, though. Strange energy readings emanated from below the planet's crust. Whatever remained of the Solarii was hidden beneath the surface, and Raylan knew that it was her crew's mission to find them. "Captain," Jack said again, his voice more urgent this time, "we're picking up strange energy signatures, extremely faint but distinct. They're coming from beneath the surface. It's almost as if—" Raylan didn't wait for him to finish. She was already on her feet, heading for the lift to the ship's lower deck. "I'm going down. Keep me updated on the readings. Get the ground team ready." Within moments, Raylan and her team, Dr. Zane along with a few security officers, were suited up and ready to descend to the planet's surface. The ship's lander was prepared, its engines rumbling as it prepared to break through the atmosphere. The descent was bumpy. the ship's landing gear shaking with each passing moment as they broke through the turbulent clouds of Valen 606. The planet below was shrouded in a strange mist, a pale light that seemed to distort everything it touched. Raylan's instincts told her that whatever had happened here, whatever catastrophe had torn this place apart, had left behind an energy field that was both unnatural and powerful. The Solarii were not dead, but something had kept them in stasis, locked in a fragile balance between existence and nothingness. The lander touched down with a soft thud, and Raylan was the first to exit, her boots crunching against the ash-covered ground. The air was thin, and a strange buzzing sound filled her ears, as though the planet itself was resonating with a frequency too high to be heard by human ears. The ruins of an ancient city sprawled before her, broken buildings and twisted crystalline structures, once beautiful and now lifeless. "Captain, the energy readings are coming from that direction," Dr. Zane said, pointing toward a massive crystalline structure in the distance. The stone seemed to pulse with a soft glow, the vibrations in the air intensifying as they neared it. It was clear that this was the source of the energy, the heart of what remained of the Solarii. The team moved swiftly, their steps echoing in the eerie silence. As they approached the structure, Raylan couldn't help but feel a strange sense of awe. The Solarii had built this beacon, this lifeline, but it was also a tomb for a race that had been forgotten, a race that had been left to die alone. When they reached the base of the crystalline spire, Raylan could feel the energy pulsing more intensely. It was as if the structure itself was alive, throbbing with power, waiting. She looked at Dr. Zane, who was already working to interface their technology with the ancient Solarii machinery. "This is it," Zane muttered, her fingers flying over the console. "If we can trigger the right sequence, we might be able to stabilize the Solarii energy patterns, but it's risky. If we make one wrong move, the whole structure could collapse." Raylan didn't hesitate. "We don't have a choice. Start the sequence." With a deep breath, Zane initiated the process. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and the light from the crystal intensified, casting strange shadows across the ruins. The buzzing sound grew louder, almost deafening. Raylan's heart raced as she waited for something, anything, to happen. And then it did. The crystal flared with brilliant light, and a figure emerged from the glowing core. At first it was only a shape, a distortion in the air. But then it took form. The figure was tall and luminous, a being of light and energy. Its features were fluid, almost impossible to comprehend, as if its very existence defied the laws of physics. The Solarii had awoken. Raylan's breath caught in her throat as the figure turned toward her, its eyes glowing with an ancient intelligence. "You are the first to come," Valaria's voice echoed in her mind, not a sound, but a thought that resonated deep within her. "Why have you come?" Raylan swallowed, her voice trembling with the weight of the moment. "We've come to help you, to free you from the prison of time that holds you." The Solari's form flickered for a moment, a ripple passing through it as if it were contemplating her words. Then the figure spoke again, its voice tinged with sadness. "We were abandoned, left to die by those who came before you. Your kind. You are the first to offer assistance. But why?" Raylan didn't hesitate. "Because no one should ever be abandoned, not by anyone, not by anything. We won't leave you to perish alone." The Solari's energy shifted, a soft, melodic hum reverberating through the air. Raylan felt a deep sense of peace in the presence of the being. It was as if the Solari were no longer alone, no longer lost. For the first time in centuries, they had been found. "You are different," the Solarii said. "You are the first to see us, to hear us." Raylan nodded. "We see you, we hear you, and we'll make sure the galaxy does too." The Solari's form rippled again, and for the first time Raylan thought she saw something resembling hope in its luminous eyes. Then we are not forgotten. You will protect us? Raylan's voice was firm, resolute. Yes, we will protect you. You are not alone anymore. And with that, the bond was formed. The Solari, once abandoned and ignored, now had a protector in humanity. The galaxy would know their name, and they would rise again, not as forgotten souls, but as a race reborn. Raylan's heart swelled with purpose as she turned back to her team. The mission was only just beginning. The Elysium would stand with the Solari, no matter what came next. This expanded chapter introduces Raylan's discovery of the Solari, the uncertainty surrounding the mission, and the eventual awakening of the Solari. Through her actions, Captain Raylan and her crew establish a bond with this once-forgotten race, setting the stage for an epic tale of intergalactic compassion, protection, and alliance. The Elysium hovered in the shadow of Valence 6, the darkened planet below bathed in a soft, eerie glow from distant stars. The lander had made its descent earlier that morning, and the crew had established a temporary base of operations just outside the ruins of what had once been a thriving Solari city. Captain Raylan had been briefed by Commander Jax on the various findings, but it was clear to her that what they had uncovered was only the beginning. The crystalline structure deep within the planet's crust was a relic. Ancient, yet pulsing with an energy that was unmistakably alive. The Solari were no longer just myths or forgotten ghosts. They were real, and they had awoken. Yet the planet remained a mystery, its secrets still veiled behind strange energy fields and distorted timelines. Raylan stood in the ship's command center, watching the telemetry feed from the ground team as they worked to understand the energy signatures emanating from the Solari spire. The entire ship hummed with an odd vibrancy, as if the Elysium itself was tuned to the frequency of the alien planet. Around her, the crew moved with quiet determination, though the tension in the air was palpable. Not many had volunteered for this mission. Not many believed that the Solari could truly be saved. Dr. Ophelia Zane, the ship's lead scientist, stood nearby, her expression contemplative as she analyzed the data. Raylan knew that Zane had her doubts. The scientists had spent years studying alien technologies, but the Solari were an enigma, too different, too strange to understand completely. Raylan had hoped to change her mind. She needed Zane's expertise to unravel the mysteries of the Solari and to make sure that whatever solution they found didn't turn into an even bigger disaster. In time, "Captain, you might want to see this," Zane said, her voice tinged with urgency. Raylan stepped over to the holographic display where Zane had been reviewing the planetary data. The once chaotic energy signatures now formed a pattern, a sequence that was growing stronger as the hours passed. At first, the signals had been faint and erratic, but now they were rhythmic, like a heartbeat, growing in intensity. "It's almost like they're trying to communicate," Zane murmured, more to herself than to Raylan, "but it's not like any form of communication we've ever encountered." Raylan leaned in closer, her brow furrowing. "Can we translate it?" Zane shook her head. "Not yet. The energy fields are interfering with our instruments, creating distortions in the data. We're not sure what we're looking at, but it's clear this isn't a natural occurrence. It's deliberate." Raylan's mind raced. This wasn't just a case of rescuing the Solari from a cosmic disaster. Something had been hidden from them, something that the Solari had left behind for a reason. They were no longer just dealing with a race in peril. They were dealing with something far more complex. But Raylan was determined to push forward. "We'll get it figured out. Keep working on it, and keep me updated." Zane nodded, and Raylan turned to face the rest of her crew. As she made her way toward the airlock, her thoughts swirled with uncertainty. They had no idea what the Solari would be like, no real idea of what they had become in their long years of isolation. Would they be grateful for the rescue, or would they see humanity as just another civilization to ignore? More importantly, would they be dangerous? The galaxy had left them behind for a reason. The airlock hissed as it sealed behind her, and Raylan descended the ladder to the planet's surface. A cool, sterile wind greeted her as she stepped out into the desolate landscape. The ground was rocky, cracked, and barren, but far in the distance she could see the faint glow of the crystalline structure that had once been the heart of the Solari civilization. The place where everything had gone wrong. Dr. Zane had insisted on coming along, and Raylan had agreed. They needed to understand the situation better, to get a sense of what the Solari might need. The two of them, along with a small security detail, trekked toward the site. Their boots crunched over the dry earth, the air vibrating with the faint energy pulses that came from the spire. The landscape was empty, devoid of life. There were no plants, no animals, no sign of anything living at all. Just the vast, open emptiness of a world abandoned by time itself. As they approached the structure, Raylan couldn't help but feel the weight of the situation pressing on her shoulders. She had read all the reports, studied the ancient archives, and listened to the whispers of other civilizations about the Solari, but none of it had prepared her for this. The crystalline spire loomed ahead, its sharp angles reflecting the dull greenish light of the distant stars. It was beautiful in its own way. Alien. Otherworldly. Raylan stood before it, studying the intricate patterns that covered its surface. She could feel a pulse in the air, like the thrum of a living organism. There was a warmth to it, strange yet comforting, like the presence of an old, forgotten friend. Dr. Zane stepped closer, her eyes scanning the structure. "This is unlike anything I've ever seen," she muttered. "It's alive, in a way, a fusion of technology and organic material. Could this be their home? Or a tomb?" Raylan asked, her voice low. Zane paused, considering the question. Perhaps both. The Solari civilization was known for merging science and spirituality in ways we can't even begin to understand. It's possible this structure served as a living archive, something that housed the collective knowledge of their entire race. A noise from behind them interrupted their conversation. One of the security officers, Lt. Castor, stepped forward, his voice tense. "Captain, you might want to see this." Raylan turned toward him, her hand instinctively reaching for the weapon at her side, though she doubted she would need it. The last thing they needed was a fight with the Solari, or whatever remained of them. Castor led them to a nearby fissure in the ground, where a jagged crack had opened in the earth. The faint light from the spire illuminated the edges of the crack, and at the bottom, Raylan saw something that made her stomach lurch. The bodies, if they could be called bodies, of what appeared to be the Solari, suspended in an ethereal state, half-formed, glowing faintly. Zane knelt down, her hands hovering over the strange beings. "These are Solari," she whispered, "but they're broken, incomplete." Raylan's mind raced as she knelt beside her, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. The Solari had been a race of energy-based beings, their forms not bound by physical laws in the way humans or other species were. But these were remnants, shattered pieces of a civilization that had been torn apart. They weren't entirely gone, but they were far from whole. "They're still alive," Zane said, her voice shaking, "but in a state of suspended animation. These are their souls, their consciousness, but they've been fragmented. The catastrophe that shattered their world did more than destroy their bodies. It destroyed their very essence." Raylan swallowed hard. "So they've been trapped here, in this state of limbo, for centuries." "Yes," Zane replied. "And it's getting worse. Their energy is dissipating. If we don't act quickly, they could fade away entirely." Raylan's heart clenched. These beings, abandoned by every other civilization, left to die alone for reasons no one had ever fully understood. Now they were depending on humanity to save them. But what if they couldn't? What if they were too far gone? "We have to try," Raylan said, firmly standing up. "We'll do everything we can to bring them back. We can't let them disappear like this." As she spoke, the light from the crystal spire flickered, casting long shadows across the broken remains of the Solarii. The strange hum in the air grew louder, almost as if the planet itself was urging them to hurry, to make a decision, to act before time ran out. Dr. Zane looked up at her, her face pale. "But we don't know how. We have no idea how to reverse what's been done." Raylan's gaze hardened. "Then we'll figure it out. Together." But even as she spoke the words, Raylan wasn't sure if they had enough time. The Solari had been forgotten for too long, and now, for the first time in centuries, someone had found them. But would it be enough to save them? They had no answers, only determination, and that Raylan believed was enough to keep pushing forward. Captain Raylan couldn't shake the image of the Solarii fragments hovering in the rift, their energy fading like the last embers of a dying star. The thought of these once glorious beings, whose civilization had reached the heights of understanding and power, now reduced to floating echoes, barely tethered to existence, sent a chill down her spine. Humanity had found them, but now they had to save them. The stakes were far higher than she had ever anticipated. As she returned to the base camp near the crystalline spire, her thoughts raced. The Solarii's existence, once believed to be a myth, had now become a living, breathing reality. And with that reality came a flood of responsibility. She had promised them they wouldn't be left to die alone, but Raylan wasn't sure if they could succeed. The crew was working tirelessly to decipher the alien technology, to understand the energy patterns emanating from the planet's core, but nothing about the situation made sense. If anything, it seemed as though they were only scratching the surface of a problem much larger than they had prepared for. Dr. Zane was already back in the makeshift lab, her brow furrowed as she examined the latest data gathered from the spire. The readings were more erratic than ever, fluctuating between steady pulses of energy and sudden, jarring spikes. Each time they thought they had made a breakthrough, the system would change, shifting like sand beneath their feet. "Have you made any progress?" Raylan asked, stepping into the lab and approaching Zane. The scientist didn't look up immediately, her eyes locked onto the holographic screen. "There's no manual for this, Captain," Zane replied, her voice strained. "We're dealing with something completely foreign here. Every time we think we understand what we're looking at, it's like the entire system adapts to our presence, changing the rules of engagement." Raylan crossed her arms, her eyes scanning the display. The hologram showed a map of the planet's energy network, with various nodes of concentrated power linked by pulsing lines of light. Some of the nodes were fading in and out, while others flickered in patterns that seemed to mimic the pulse of a heartbeat. It was impossible to ignore the sense that the Solarii were aware of their presence, but that awareness was distant, disconnected, like a fragmented consciousness trying to find itself again. Zane let out a frustrated sigh and turned to Raylan. "I've been studying their history, their culture. From what we can piece together, the Solarii were not just physical beings. They were tied to a different dimension, a higher plane of consciousness. Their bodies were vessels, yes, but their true selves were something else entirely. This catastrophe they suffered didn't just physically damage their world. It tore apart their very essence, their connection to the universe itself." Raylan's heart tightened as she absorbed Zane's words. The Solarii hadn't just lost their planet or their society, they had lost themselves. Their very identities had been scattered across space and time, fractured by an event that no one had fully understood. And now, centuries later, they were left to die alone unless humanity could figure out how to restore what had been lost. "How do we fix that?" Raylan asked, her voice softer than before. Zane hesitated, her eyes drifting toward the holographic map again. "We can't. At least, not with what we have right now. The only thing that might be able to heal them is the heart of their technology, the core of their energy network. But that's deep underground, and we don't even know if it's stable anymore." Raylan clenched her jaw. "We going down there?" Zing turned sharply. "Captain, that's too dangerous. We don't know what kind of instability we're dealing with down there. We've barely scratched the surface of the energy system, and you want to send a team into the heart of it? The Solarii might have left it that way for a reason." Raylan met Zane's gaze, her resolve hardening. "I've never been one to shy away from danger, and I'm not about to turn my back on them now. We have to try. We've come this far." Zane hesitated, her eyes drifting toward the holographic map again. "We can't. At least not with what we have right now. The only thing that might be able to heal them is the heart of their technology, the core of their energy network. But that's deep underground, and we don't even know if it's stable anymore." Raylan clenched her jaw. "We're going down there." Zane turned sharply. "Captain, that's too dangerous. We don't know what kind of instability we're dealing with down there. We've barely scratched the surface of the energy system, and you want to send a team into the heart of it? The Solarii might have left it that way for a reason." Raylan met Zane's gaze, her resolve hardening. "I've never been one to shy away from danger, and I'm not about to turn my back on them now. We have to try. We've come this far." Zane's lips parted, but she didn't argue further. Instead, she turned back to the console, running her hands through her hair in exasperation. "You'll need a full team, and we'll have to make sure our equipment is compatible with their systems. If something goes wrong—" "It won't," Raylan interrupted, though even she wasn't entirely sure. "We'll make sure it doesn't." Later that day, Raylan stood with her team in front of the makeshift landing craft, ready to descend once again into the heart of the planet. The other crew members, including Zane, had stayed behind to monitor the data, ensuring that they could respond to any issues that might arise during the mission. This time, the stakes were higher. This time, they weren't just exploring an ancient site. They were seeking the very foundation of the Solari's power, their connection to the universe itself. The craft's engines roared to life, and the team descended through the planet's atmosphere. As they neared the coordinates where the core of the Solari's technology was believed to lie, Raylan couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding. The energy around them pulsed more violently now, like the breath of a sleeping giant disturbed by an intruder. They were trespassing on something far older and more powerful than anything humanity had encountered before. The lander finally touched down on solid ground with a jarring thud. Raylan motioned for her team to disembark, and they stepped onto the surface, their boots sinking into the uneven, rocky terrain. The air was still, heavy with the weight of centuries, and the faint hum of the Solari's energy systems was more pronounced here. It felt as though the very planet itself was alive, watching them, waiting. "We need to follow this path," Zane said, pointing toward a faint trail of light that led toward a massive cliffside in the distance. "The core should be beneath there. We'll have to dig through layers of debris, but the path is clear." Raylan nodded, and the team moved forward, carefully navigating the jagged landscape. The journey was slow, the terrain unforgiving, but they pressed on, driven by the urgency of their mission. The closer they got to the cliffside, the more intense the energy became, until it felt like the very air was vibrating with power. As they reached the base of the cliff, the ground beneath their feet shifted. There was a low rumble, and the rock face in front of them split apart, revealing a hidden entrance. The walls within glowed with the same soft pulse of light that had emanated from the spire earlier. This was it, the heart of the Solari's power. Raylan motioned for the team to proceed, and they entered the structure, their footsteps echoing in the vast empty space. The walls seemed to shimmer with the remnants of the Solari's energy, flickering like the last remnants of a dying star. It was clear that whatever had happened here, it was a place of great power, power that had been severed from the Solarii, leaving them scattered and fragmented. They moved deeper into the heart of the structure, following the trail of energy until they came upon a vast chamber. At its center stood a massive crystalline formation, pulsing with an eerie glow. The crystal was unlike anything Raylan had ever seen before. Its surface was both smooth and jagged, like a prism refracting light from an unseen source. It was beautiful and terrifying and ancient. Raylan approached the crystal cautiously, her mind racing with the implications of what this might mean. This was it, This was the heart of the Solari's power, their connection to the universe itself. But it was also a source of incredible instability. There was no telling what could happen if they tampered with it. "Captain," Zane called from behind her, "I'm detecting fluctuations in the energy output. If we engage with the crystal, it could destabilize the entire core." Raylan turned back to her. "We don't have a choice. If we don't try now, the Solari will die. And if we fail, we fail. But we can't walk away." Zane hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "Understood. But if this doesn't work, we need to be ready to retreat immediately." Raylan approached the crystal and placed her hand on its surface. The moment she did, the world around her seemed to shift. The chamber trembled as if the planet itself were reacting to her touch. A deep, resonating hum filled the air, vibrating through her bones, and for a brief moment she felt a strange connection to something beyond the physical world. It was as if the crystal was alive, its consciousness reaching out to her, pulling her in. Then, in a flash of light, everything went dark. Raylan stumbled back, disoriented, her vision swimming as the crystal's energy surged through her. But before she could regain her bearings, a voice echoed in her mind, ancient and unfamiliar, yet somehow comforting. "You have come," the voice whispered. "You have found us, but it is not enough." Raylan's heart pounded in her chest. "Who are you?" she asked, though she wasn't sure if she was speaking aloud or if the words were merely thoughts within her mind. "We are the Solari," the voice replied. "But we are no longer whole. You have touched the heart of our power, but it is only a fragment. To restore us, you must do more." Raylan's eyes widened in understanding. "What must we do?" The voice paused, as if considering. "You must sacrifice the part of yourselves that binds you to this world. Only then can we be whole again. Only then can we exist beyond the veil of time." Raylan didn't understand, but the urgency in the voice was undeniable. She looked around at her team, their faces tense, awaiting her decision. "We will do whatever it takes," she said firmly. "We won't leave you again." The voice seemed to pulse with a gentle warmth, as if in approval. "Then prepare," it whispered. "Prepare to give everything." And as Raylan stood there, ready to face whatever lay ahead, she knew that this was only the beginning. The Solari had been abandoned, forgotten, and left to die, but humanity had found them, and they would not leave them to fall apart again. In this third chapter, Captain Raylan and her team ventured deeper into the planet's core, discovering the true heart of the Solari's power. As they attempt to restore the broken race, they confront unimaginable challenges and make a profound connection with the remnants of the Solari's consciousness. The chapter sets the stage for the difficult choices and sacrifices ahead, as the crew races to save an alien race on the brink of extinction. Raylan's mind buzzed with the weight of the Solari's words, their meaning elusive and cryptic. As she stood in the heart of their ancient chamber, surrounded by the pulsing, enigmatic crystal, she could still feel the ethereal echo of their voice reverberating through her. The Solari were more than just a race on the brink of extinction. They were an ancient consciousness, fractured, shattered across time and space. And they needed something from her, from humanity itself. "We will not leave you to fall apart again," Raylan had promised. But the heavy silence in the chamber that followed her declaration only deepened her uncertainty. Her hand still hovered on the surface of the crystal, the energy beneath her fingertips thrumming like a living entity. She knew that something profound was happening, but the cost of that action was something she wasn't entirely prepared for. "Captain!" Zane's voice broke through the haze of her thoughts, pulling her back into the present. The scientist's voice trembled as she approached. This is beyond anything we've ever encountered. If we tamper with this energy, we could trigger a chain reaction. I'm detecting instability. If we aren't careful..." Raylan turned to face her, swallowing hard. Zane's warnings were well-founded. The energy coming from the Solari core was unlike anything they had ever studied. and the volatile fluctuations were increasing by the second. Yet Raylan couldn't ignore the desperate plea in the voice of the Solarii. They were not just asking for help, they were urging humanity to become part of something far larger than themselves. The thought sent shivers down her spine. They were on the precipice of something monumental, and it was clear that the Solari had never meant for their legacy to end in tragedy. "We need to make a decision," Raylan said, her voice steely. "We can't just walk away now. We've come this far." Zane gave her a long look, hesitation flickering in her eyes, but in the end the scientist gave a reluctant nod. "I know, but we need to understand what we're really dealing with here, Captain. This could be the end of everything." Raylan understood the gravity of the situation. They had all been trained to face the unknown, but nothing had prepared them for this. The Solarii were not just alien beings, they were a living testament to the fragility of time itself, trapped between dimensions, their essence distorted by some cataclysmic event. If they were going to help, they needed to understand the nature of that catastrophe and whether there was any chance of reversing it. "Let's keep going," Raylan finally said, her voice resolute. "We don't know if there's even a chance to save them, but we can't afford to stop now." With a sense of grim determination, the team began preparing the equipment to interface directly with the Solari's core. The instability in the energy system was only worsening, but they were committed to their mission. Zane was working furiously at the holographic controls, trying to map the energy signatures emanating from the crystal. Raylan stayed by her side, watching over her shoulder. The light from the core flickered and pulsed, sending strange shadows dancing along the chamber walls. As the team moved closer to the heart of the Solari's power, a distant rumble reverberated through the ground, sending vibrations up through their boots. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. Then the crystals surged, sending a wave of energy throughout the chamber. Raylan staggered, her hand gripping the nearest console to steady herself as the shock wave passed through her. She could hear the crackling of static in her ears, the hum of power thrumming through her body. Zane's voice echoed in her mind as the chamber seemed to shift. Impersonal. "What is happening?" Zane gasped. "Captain, something is wrong." The light around them intensified, and for a brief moment, Raylan felt herself drawn into the core's magnetic field. She lost her footing, her vision blurring as her senses were overwhelmed. It was as though her very consciousness was being pulled into the heart of the energy, drawn into a place beyond space and time. A voice, ancient and familiar, resonated in her mind once more. "You have come far, human, but now you must choose." Raylan's heart raced as she tried to focus, her thoughts becoming jumbled. The voice was not the Solarii she had encountered before. This was something deeper, something older, an entity born from the very essence of the crystal. Her breath caught as the voice seemed to surround her, filling her mind completely. "Choose what?" Raylan demanded. "What do you want from us? You are the ones who have reached us, and we cannot return to what we were. We are not your simple ancestors or your distant gods. We are the core, the consciousness that once spanned this world and beyond. But we are broken. You must decide. Do you wish to revive us, or will you leave us to fade forever?" Raylan swallowed hard. The gravity of the decision weighed down on her like a physical force. What did it mean to revive a consciousness so vast, so ancient, that it had once stretched across galaxies? And what did it mean for humanity to be part of that revival? She could feel the pull of the crystal, the energy beginning to intensify again, like a deep, rhythmic pulse. Her hand still lay on its surface as though it had become a conduit between her world and the one the Solarii once inhabited. "We can't leave you to die," she whispered, though the uncertainty gnawed at her. "But what will it cost us?"